Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Allison Camerata. I'm the host of CNN's morning show called New Day, and it was my distinct pleasure to be able to watch in my own private screening this past weekend, Promising Young Woman, and I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions about it, so I'm really excited to talk to the women behind it. So let me bring in Carey Mulligan, who stars as Cassie, and Emerald Fennell, who is the writer and director. Ladies, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. So Emerald, I would describe this as an intense movie. It was a nail biter for me watching it alone with the screener. And so I've heard it described as a dark comedy, but I'm not sure that that fully captures it. So Emerald, how do you describe the movie?
Well, I'm not very useful either because it's quite hard to describe, and I haven't found, even in the year of talking about it, a very succinct way. But I think it is a dark comedy revenge thriller that sort of upends what we know and expect about revenge and thrillers, I suppose.
I think that nails it. And just tell us a little bit about why that was an important story for you to tell.
So I think the thing is with Promising Young Woman is, like a lot of us, I grew up in a world where, getting girls drunk at parties, losing your virginity by any means necessary, peeping in locker rooms, all of this kind of stuff was just, it was banter. Women waking up not knowing who they were lying next to and going on a walk of shame. These were sort of comedy tropes. And I think I felt like a lot of people did, that this was sort of profoundly disturbing, and that our sort of society had just, we'd all been complicit in covering up something incredibly horrible and abusive. And so in trying to sort of distill this idea, something came to me, which was this idea of a woman very, very, very drunk on a bed, being undressed, drunkenly asking the person undressing her, "What are you doing?" And then suddenly sitting up sober and looking at him and saying, "What are you doing?" And I think that was where the whole movie came from. And for me, it was always about, if what you're doing isn't wrong, why are you scared when you get caught?
I think that's an excellent question. And so, Carey, tell us about, as I understand it, you read the script cold. Nobody had prepped you for what was in it. And so tell us about that moment that you read it, and about that particular moment that Emerald was just talking about, when you see that the actress, Cassie, the character, Cassie, has that moment of being drunk and then sitting up clear-eyed and stone cold sober. What do you think as an actor when you see a moment like that in a film?
Fuck yeah, this is awesome. Like, I was so in from just the first page of dialogue, but at that moment particularly, I think, as someone who's reading it and as an audience, you just it's just it's one of those magic moments, I think, in film, and it asks so many questions. And what I love about what Emerald wrote is that it doesn't answer them, and when we don't get to walk away with a sort of perfect conclusion. But I think throughout the film you just constantly have everything kind of turned on its head at every turn. And yeah, I remember the first time I read my script, I started reading it on my phone because I was so excited to have a script from Emerald, because I'd met her very briefly and I thought she was very cool. So I was excited to read it, and I found myself an hour later still standing up in my kitchen just reading it on my phone, because I couldn't even sort of sit down to carry on. I was just so engrossed. So it was just, it was such a thrill to read.
And Carey, what about the themes that Emerald just talked about? I get it. I understand. I grew up in the 80s. I started working in the 90s. I know these tropes that she talks about. But do you feel that those experiences are as universal as the movie depicts them?
I do. I mean, I think unfortunately so. And an interesting reaction that has sort of occurred amongst even just a sort of, friends of mine is is like husbands or boyfriends saying to their girlfriends or wives, "Oh, is this? Have you had this? Has this happened to you, or have you been? Do guys wolf whistle you? Like, do you feel? Do you have that kind of unease walking down a street on your? All of these things." Um, have kind of sparked from watching the film. And I think, and the majority of the women I know say, yeah, yeah, since I was a teenager, that's just what it's been like. And I guess, women have talked amongst themselves about it, talked in circles about it. And, the last couple of years, obviously, people have been talking more, and people have been courageously speaking out. But I think certainly so much of this, I think everybody feels connected to this in some way. They know somebody who's had their lives touched by something like this.
Carey, I understand the first time you watched it with an audience was at the Sundance.
Yeah.
So tell me what that experience was like.
Well, that was it. That was I watched it on a laptop the week before, with a friend, and then I watched it in Sundance, and those were my two viewing experiences, and they were very different. Watching it on a laptop with my friend, I was just sort of like this the whole time. But I knew that I wanted to see it with an audience in Sundance, and actually I even persuaded Bo to watch it because Bo Burnham did not want. He was too nervous, and I said, Bo, you have to. It'll be torture in some ways, and I hate watching myself as well, but we've got to see it with an audience. And it absolutely was. He was very, he said afterwards, begrudgingly, that he was very grateful that I'd bullied him into it, because watching it with an audience was the most extraordinary experience. I'm used to being in films where, you hope for silence. That's what you want in a screening, is you just want everyone to be quiet because you hope that it's sort of, but with this, it was just sort of audible reactions throughout, people laughing and people sort of shouting at the screen, and people, it was the most amazing experience sitting in there. And Emerald and I were completely dazed afterwards. Yeah, it was very, very exciting.
Emerald, I watched part of the film with my husband. He was sort of coming in and out while I was taking notes and watching it. And he's more visually oriented than I am. And he immediately got it. He was like, something's happening in this movie. Like that, he immediately got that that you were playing somehow with like the perspective, like the lens perspective and the color saturation. Like it struck him immediately. I was sort of focused on the story and the script. But tell us about that. Tell me about what you were doing and what message you were trying to send with that.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there are a few things certainly about the color, the art design, the costume texture, things like that, was that it needed to be Cassie's film. It needed to be everything that she is, which is sort of ultra feminine, seemingly innocuous, unthreatening, pink. It sort of catches you off guard, because I think we still have this idea that things that are, and I use feminine in the most generic way, but things like Britney Spears and Paris Hilton and manicures and blowouts and ribbons, we think they're in some ways indicative of shallowness, or of of a person who is not interesting or thoughtful, or certainly not murderous or boiling with rage and fury and despair. So I think part of it is to entice the audience, is to give them a full sense of security. And then part of it, the way that we filmed it, was that it's very contained, it's very formal, it's very composed. Like Cassie is, she's a very contained, formal, composed person. And so we really only loosen up when she loses control. So when she's falling in love, we use a bit of Steadicam. When she starts, after she's watched the videotape and things, and she goes outside and things are kind of whirling around her. But in general, it needed to feel, I think, the film in general, like it was her film and her space. Because we change genres so much, we kind of pull little, I suppose, surprises here and there. So I think the audience was very important that they knew that this was a considered thing. nothing was haphazard. Everything was very deliberately chosen, I guess.
And I got that impression about the soundtrack too. So let's talk about that soundtrack, because it definitely gets your attention. And when I was listening to it, I thought, oh, is the message Emerald's sending here? I thought at first, but now I think I'm wrong. But at first I thought, oh, is she deliberately choosing artists, female artists, who have been like vilified or crucified somehow? When I first heard Paris Hilton and Britney Spears, I thought that maybe that was the message that you were sending. But by the end, there were so many different artists, modern and from a decade ago. So what was the message?
Well, I think first and foremost, it was about the thing that it was a soundtrack to set the tone of the film, to work with the film, to kind of have all of the things that the film has, which I think is a kind of ultra femininity, which is sort of subversiveness, I hope a kind of wit, irony, but also an emotion. So absolutely, Britney Spears and Paris Hilton are on there, not only because I think that they're geniuses, and I think that those are two of the most legitimately great pop songs of the last 20 years, but of course, yes, these are women who, like Cassie, have been kind of maybe undermined because of the way they present themselves or what they do. And I think we're starting to reevaluate how they are perceived. But, we also have things like, Something Wonderful from The King and I, which is a song about a man who is horrific, but occasionally he does something wonderful. And we have Charlie XCX's Boys, which starts the film, and the lyrics are, I was busy thinking about boys. So all of that, and then Amazing Capital Records got brilliant people to come in and cover things like He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss, one of the most misogynistic songs ever written by Phil Spector. And so we cover that. It's all female artists, and it's that it's part of one world, I think, and it's a world that says, like, yeah, you can be a few things at once, and nobody's allowed to tell you that just because you like Britney Spears and going to a nail salon that you're not gonna, I don't know, shoot someone in the heart if you don't want to, or mow them down with your car. We make assumptions about women all the time based on how they look, and they're almost invariably wrong.
And then they might take out a scalpel and cut you up.
Yeah. There's no way they wouldn't.
That leads us to the role of men in this movie. And so this is a question for both of you. But I'll start with you, Carey. Did you worry when you read the script or in acting in it that it paints men with too broad a brush in that? We all know men, who we love and who are compassionate and who are kind and who show up for women. But Cassie meets, it seems like, more than her share of predators. And so what did you think about the role of men?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but every encounter she has is so deliberate. She's I think it's. I didn't feel like it was a broad brush. It's just the subject matter that we're looking at. She's in a situation where she is someone who I think, Emerald and I talked a lot about grief, and we talked a lot about shame, and we talked a lot about addiction, and her coping mechanism for the grief that she's in is to go out in these sort of excursions in the evening, and inevitably, that's a dangerous thing that she's putting herself into. But it's a situation, where she is coming across these sort of men. So, it's somewhat her coping mechanism is sort of alleviating her trauma and her pain temporarily by being able to school these guys in their behavior. So I think, those are the encounters that you're witnessing. And you also see, Clancy Brown, who's, who plays my father so beautifully, and, who is, so I think it's, very much the subject matter that we're dealing with rather than a sort of indictment of men in general. But Emerald can probably speak more to it.
Yeah, Emerald, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is that the nice guys don't feature in that world because they leave her alone. You know,
Exactly.
this wouldn't be a film if it was a film about the kind of occasions where people do behave well, or you know, indeed the occasions when things are more unpleasant, which we chose not to show. I think certainly those of us who've ever been to a nightclub know that not every single man in there is a predator, but there's bound to be one. You know, statistically, there's nothing in this film that isn't in, I mean, comedies. There's nothing in this film that hasn't been discussed in common rooms and at colleges, in pubs and bars, as jokes for years. Nothing in this film is even remotely, unfortunately, unusual. And I don't think that that's an unfair indictment of men. I think it's an honest appraisal of the culture that we all grew up in. And I think that there are lots of people who have been lucky enough to manage to escape it somehow, but very few. It's because, you know, I think a lot of us grew up being told that this was normal and it was fine. And so the boys believed what they were doing was okay, it was a loophole, and the girls believed it was their fault. And so I think it's actually a very generous film about forgiveness and how we forgive people. And, you know, there are women in it too who have, for various reasons of their own, been complicit. I would say that Madison, Alison Brie's character, is complicit because she says in the film, it happened all the time. That's how she coped. So how a lot of women cope is by brushing it off, by laughing it off, by doubling down. You know, Connie Britton is the dean of the most patriarchal institution in the world, what she had to shed to get there. And then you look at the institutions, you look at the cop who comes, the questions he asks are so leading. He thinks she's nuts. Even her own father, you know, has to admit that she's not well. And all of our innate assumptions as a society and the structures that hold up the society are that women are difficult and crazy. And that Cassie, who was just, all she wants is one person to say, this thing was wrong. This thing was so wrong and we're so sorry. And no one will say it because it's too awful, because it means all of us have to admit that we've been part of something terribly, terribly cruel. And so I don't know, I think that if there's any purpose in this film for me, it's about how we can move forward. And that's men and women. And I think any men who find this film confronting or difficult or unrealistic definitely haven't talked to the women in their life thoroughly enough and haven't evaluated their own behavior, I would say, unfortunately.
I thought that you did, I thought it was interesting that you highlighted the women's culpability also. You know, women didn't get a pass in this film. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about, that the culture, it was all sort of you have to, if you're going to go along with this culture and be a part of it, there is a complicity from all sexes. So I thought I thought you did that really effectively. In the end, there is this, I mean, look, there's a million twists in this film, obviously, but the end has a twist that I did not see coming and that nobody could see coming, I think. And I'm just wondering if you, in writing it, and Carey, you enacting it, and you both in you know, talking about it, was there ever a moment where you thought, let's give Cassie a happy ending instead? Like, was there a time where you debated maybe she can live happily ever after somehow after all of this dark episode?
It depends what constitutes a happy ending, because everyone has such a different idea. Is a happy ending she kills them all and walks away in slow motion to the sound of, like, I'm on Fire by Bruce Springsteen? I don't know, I'm trying to think of so, you know, because then she goes to jail and she is crazy. Or is it that she forgets about Nina and she gets over it and she shuts up and she does what everyone else does and she, you know, she marries Ryan? where's the happy ending? And I'm not saying that it isn't possible to have a happy ending after trauma, absolutely not. But this is a story about someone who is living in a world, dealing with people who will never say sorry unless something fundamentally changes. And so, you know, I think that the happy ending would have been the responsibility of everyone else in this film to behave better, and they didn't. So therefore, it was kind of impossible.
That's really interesting. I mean, to do that mental exercise of what would that look like? What would a happy ending look like? I mean, this one, certainly she gets justice, and that's satisfying, though it's delivered in this dark way. Carey, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, I got 20 days into filming this 23-day shoot and couldn't believe it was about to be over. So I had a brief moment of thinking, well, how could I prolong this experience? But no, I mean, it always felt like the own, you know, I think exactly what Emerald said, you know, and it's interesting what the reaction has been from just, you know, from a couple of people that I've spoken to about her actions. Because, you know, I've had more than a couple of people when I've been talking about this film, you know, for press and with, you know, people who've seen the film, you know, saying, well, she's kind of crazy, right? And it's such a, I think of all of the films that we see where men go on warpaths, quite literally, blowing things up, you know, going into the most extreme levels of violence and and drastic action and international travel and, you know, all sorts of things. And it's regarded as, well, this man is very passionate and he's, you know, he very much loves his wife or his daughter or his, you know, whatever it is. And yet Cassie really is just going around playing mind games, and she's sort of dubbed as being crazy. And so I think the ending had to, you know, it had to look at the truth. And I think the truth of the way that Cassie deals with this is, you know, the mind games and the way in which she's looking for not only, you know, these people to ask for forgiveness, but also forgiveness for herself. The way in which she does that feels very honest to me. It feels like the way that if any woman I know was going to try and find some justice in this way, that could be a way that you could do it. Unfortunately, a physical match, a physical battle with a man double your size is not the way that it can be done. And I think, you know, that what I love about the way that Emerald has told this story, like, yes, it is a revenge film, but I think it's also a film about the fact that revenge is futile, and that every time she gets that moment of revenge, you see very quickly the true effect of that on the person who's getting it. So, you know, after the dean's office, there's a momentary feeling of victory and it immediately disappears. The same with Alfred Molina's character Jordan, and it's almost the opposite in that moment. She gets what she wants and it makes her want to throw up. So I think, you know, that the ending had to be true to that. The truth of that situation is that once there's a weapon introduced into that room, that's the way it goes, and we know that. That's just regrettably, statistically, from life experience, the truth of those situations.
So, Emerald, what do you want viewers to take away from this ultimately?
I don't know. I mean, I know, that's a terrible answer. I don't know. I think the thing is that it's been, honestly, and this sounds very twee, but it's been so, the response has been so moving in its variety, actually. And I think I was nervous, being very, very much a people pleaser, desperate to be liked. I think I was obviously concerned about people's reaction to it and all of those sorts of things, but actually it's just been amazing, and people have been so candid. They've brought up things that are so personal. You know, if people haven't liked it, they've been so articulate in about why they hadn't. And I don't know, I don't think I could have dreamed of it, of a response better than this, because it's, I suppose, what I wanted, what we all wanted, which was for people to think about it and talk about it and enjoy the movie, you know, and because we talk so much about politics surrounding it, of course, and that's important. but also, you know, to enjoy the movie, to have enjoyed Carey's incredible performance, the beautiful design and costumes that everyone, you know, every single person who worked on it did for sort of a bag of chips. And like, so the thrill, I think, is seeing all of their work rewarded, and having people say that they loved it. And if they've then had an argument with their boyfriend or had a real conversation with their mum or their dad about it afterwards, then that's just, yeah, it's been amazing. It's more than I could hope, I think.
That's so nice to hear. And Carey, what about you? What do you hope people take away?
Yeah, I think similarly to Emerald, you know, there's been lots of people have said to me, "Oh, well, this should just be required viewing, you know, for 18-year-olds, for you know, kids coming out of school, going into college, you know," and I think that's absolutely true. But it's also what's so great about that is that it would be required viewing that would be fun as well, you know, that would be entertaining, and that's it's great, and there's a place for films that are you know, that to give us stuff to think about, that spark debate. But even more so, what's so brilliant about what Emerald made is she made a film that you don't feel like you should see, but you actually really want to see, because yes, it's talking about things that we need to talk about, but it's talking about them in a way that, you know, it invites you in, and it, you know, you are kind of brought into this world. And I think, you know, how great to have a film that is also thrilling and is also beautiful to look at and is also funny, but also you can then have it be required viewing and it be something that actually could get people to think and, you know, reflect and behave differently maybe.
Totally agree. I mean, anytime you hear something like, well, you know, that the goal is to start a conversation, that can sound like, you know, castor oil, but this is a delicious I mean, this is a juicy, delicious meal. And so it must be so I know we're running out of time, but Emerald, it must be so satisfying. And Carey, all of the Oscar nominations.
Yeah, it's just so it's so extraordinary, because honestly, you know, it is, it's that I still can't, you can tell because I can't think of like one word that can describe it. It's too wonderful. It's too wonderful. It's the best. It's the most, it's the proudest I've ever been. And knowing that, you know, every single, again, every single person who worked on this film really took a punt. And I don't know if that translates at all into American, but you know, they just took a chance. It could have, you know, no money, very, very tight schedule, and you know, and so it's just, and they all worked so hard and did such an amazing job and were so wonderful and kind and brilliant, that like, to this, I just feel so glad that their faith in it was rewarded. And yeah, I haven't gotten over it yet. I think I'm still in shock weeks later.
You can hear that. Carey, was it just too wonderful?
Oh my goodness. The whole thing was too wonderful, honestly. I mean, I really was. I was, you know, I was so sad that I'd finished filming that I came in the day after my filming was finished and made an excuse to be around just so I could sort of still be on set. I mean, I honestly, like, I just wouldn't leave. 23 days, and it went by like that, and I was mourning it for such a long time because it was just the most extraordinary experience. And it was a real labor of love. It really was a group of people who came together and, you know, had so much faith in Emerald and her vision. And for us to have gotten to this point, it's just every time someone introduces us for a Q&A and says, the Oscar nominated film Promising Young Woman, Emerald and I both just sort of giggle because we can't, it's just crazy, you know. So yeah, it's incredible, and I'm so proud to have been a part of it, just to get to be around Emerald and to watch her, you know, take this thing which I could literally, it was like when we sat for the first time and we had our first meeting, it was like if there was a little projector coming out of her mind, you would have seen the film, the finished film as it was. And she took that from our coffee meeting in Notting Hill to London, in London to LA, and made it real. And that's what we watched a year later. And it's just, you know, absolutely extraordinary to get to have worked with her. So it has been really wonderful.
Well, congratulations, ladies. It's also wonderful to get to speak to you and hear your insights and hear the behind the scenes thinking of the film. That's really special. So thank you very much. I also want to thank everybody who's been watching. So thanks to Emerald, thanks to Carey, and everybody. Please go see the film. If you haven't by chance yet, you still have a little bit of time before the Oscars. And I am told that it is officially available everywhere. So thanks so much for taking part in the conversation, ladies. I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed the film. Great talking to you.
Thank you so much.